Hello there. My name's Clive Branson, and thank you very much for giving me the time to listen to me today. So, I was actually born in Northern Ireland in 1970, and I'm happily married to Victoria, 27 years and counting. And together we have four sons, we have one grandson, and we have two granddaughters. So, back to 1970, and shortly after my birth, I suffered a brain hemorrhage. I can't imagine as a parent now how terrifying that must have been for my parents. And it was following the doctor's advice that I was actually baptised in hospital. And my chances genuinely did hang in the balance. However, survive I did. And I returned home to mom, dad, and my older sister, Linda. So now I'm going to fast forward to my 20s. And chronic migraine headaches had a huge impact on my daily life. Now, this persisted for over 2 decades. Anybody that's been unfortunate enough to suffer from migraines will understand that it can be very understated and the impact can be misunderstood. But it certainly had a huge impact on mine and my family's life. So when I was 37, I suffered a stroke at home. Now, my son was 14 days old at the time, and I know that because I was on the last day of my paternity leave. And I actually had a blood clot on the main artery of my brain. I collapsed at home and I had a seizure. So I had a week in hospital. I was so fortunate that the clot dissolved as they were preparing me for surgery. And I was a little unsteady on my legs, and I had a lot of support. I had a few blank spots in my speech, etc. But I returned to work 6 weeks later. On reflection, that was far too soon, but I was desperate to get my life back. And it was at this point that I became addicted and totally reliant on prescription painkillers. And these consisted of 30 milligrams of cocodamol and 100 milligrams of paracetamol. They were soluble, and I had 10 to 12 tablets every single day, 7 days a week. My repeat prescriptions flew through. There was never any questions. And in my mind, it was taking these tablets on such a regular basis that was keeping me going. It was keeping the headaches at bay, and it was allowing me to function and to go to work. And it was only in 2016, almost 10 years later, that I decided to go cold turkey, something that I certainly wouldn't condone, but I genuinely didn't have the willpower to do things properly. I booked 2 days off work. I had 48 hours in bed, sweat, shivers and hallucinations. And it does sound a little dramatic, like a scene from Train Spotting, but it really was that bad. But it broke the cycle, and I haven't taken one of the tablets since. I want to take you back to 2008, and it was 12 months after the stroke. And I had heart surgery to close a 12 millimeter hole in my heart. It transpires that you can have a defect from birth. It's very common. It can have 2-3 millimeter hole in your heart. You'll never have any symptoms from it. But through the investigations to discover why I'd had a stroke, they found out that I'd got this rather large hole, and they imported a 14 millimeter device, and they inserted it into my heart, closed the hole, and thankfully I've had no symptoms since. So now it's 2017, and my dad is suffering from Parkinson's and dementia. Now, most people's dad is their hero. My dad was no different. So to see him retire a little bit earlier than expected, but then within probably 2 years, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. It was incredibly difficult, and he was hugely proud and independent. My mum and dad got divorced when I was 10. He had a partner of about 35 years, and she stood by his side and cared for him right to the very end, which is a huge blessing, and that not everybody has. Now, it was during this period that I was experiencing mild weakness in my left foot and my ankle. I was walking Alfie to school, and my ankle would just go weak, and I'd think I was probably going to go over if I'd gone off the curb or something. And it went from being sort of once a week to eventually becoming a daily occurrence. And I was already seeing a neurologist for my headaches. And I mentioned this to him because I'd had my back scanned, my neck, my spine, and they had told me that it might be a neurological issue. The neurologist then did a few rudimental tests and said that he would then track the symptoms over a period of time, which of course he did. I used to go and see him maybe every 6 months, and I didn't know at the time, but of course he was ruling out certain potential problems. Eventually, probably after about 2 years, he said to me that he was going to refer me to Oxford Hospital, which is a centre of excellence for motor neurone disease. My knowledge of motor neurone disease went as far as Stephen Hawking. There was no empathy from this neurologist. There was no even real eye contact. I had the presence of mind only just to say, are you sending me to Oxford because you think I've got motor neurone disease or because you don't know? And he said, while he was shuffling his papers, oh no, Mr. Branson, it's because I think you have, and you must understand that if that's the case, then there is no treatment. So the appointment came through for Oxford very, very quickly, probably within 14 days. My wife came to me, obviously, and they'd got all the 2 years worth of tests and results in front of them, and they did similar rudimental tests, but it was very quick when they said, I'm sorry to tell you that you do actually have motor neurone disease. It seems to be the early onset and it seems to be slow. Obviously, and I don't want to martyr myself here, but my wife, this is the lady sitting next to me that I've known since I was 12 years old, was in absolute pieces. And it's not very often that I'm stuck for words, but I couldn't think of anything to make her feel any better at all. And how on earth do you even start to discuss this, both with her, with our children, the family, and our friends? But thankfully, being the force of nature that she is, and she's so much stronger than me, she took the lead and she dealt with that. So January 2018, and my dad passes away, which sounds strange saying it out loud, but it was a genuine blessing. And it was at this point where I had extremely busy. I'd left my 20-year career with the Ministry of Defence. I'd started up a health and safety consultancy. Grief was setting in. Perhaps obvious flags were raised, but they weren't recognised. Perhaps my mood was different. My concentration was less. My patience was thinner, etc. And in April 2018, I became crippled by anxiety, terrified of the outside world. And I completely lost perspective and focus. And I suffered a mental breakdown. I became absolutely convinced that my loved ones would be so much better off without me. Now, of course, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I didn't try and commit suicide, but this was my mindset. And I was convinced that they would genuinely be better off without me. And it was at this point that I was taken into psychiatric hospital, where I remained for 10 weeks. Hospital became my safe place, and it was returning to everyday life that terrified me. And I don't know whether that was due to responsibilities or losing my identity. I'm not sure, but that's exactly how I felt. Ultimately, I was welcomed home with unconditional love and support. And I never underestimate that is a blessing that not everyone has. I was in hospital with some very poorly people that didn't have any visitors at all. However, I had lost my income, my confidence, and crucially, my identity. Who am I, and how do I continue being husband, dad, granddad, and friend? So I actually sat down and I wrote 12 handwritten notes asking for light gardening work. I can cycle better than I can walk. So I cycled within a 1 mile radius of my house, and I posted my note into the nicest houses on the route. And approximately half of the people responded, and I'm still helping them today. And I really wouldn't be without it. Being out in nature, staying strong, staying healthy, both mentally and physically, is absolutely incredible, and it helps incredibly. It really does. So 2019, and my father-in-law passed away from lung cancer. We all enjoyed a huge, incredible relationship with Carl, and it was a massive blow to the family. But 2019 was not finished with me yet. I'd read up and heard on the radio and seen on the news, you're approaching 50, you should get your PSA count checked. I'm giving blood regularly. So I asked my doctor to add the PSA count to my test, and he said, yes, no problem. I took a call several days after that, and he said, I think you should probably have to go and see the urologist. Your PSA count is so low. It's something like 3.2, but it's instigated a process. But don't worry, because there are no symptoms. However, I saw the urologist. He said he wanted to do an MRI scan. He then said we need to do a biopsy. And then following that, I was told that I have stage 2 prostate cancer. I still have no symptoms, and my PSA count is still very low. I have cancer on both sides of the prostate. And my initial reaction was, please take the prostate out. But because of the motor neuron disease, Oxford ruled it out. So I have quarterly blood tests, and I have annual biopsies. And if it gets to the stage where the PSA count is rising, but brachytherapy, which was news to me, has been offered. So, which is when they put radioactive seeds into your prostate, and it kills off the cancer over a period of time. 2020, and my mom passed away from COVID complications. She had COPD. Any form of just a cold would make her poorly, but she was never going to beat COVID. An extremely difficult time. It was she actually beat the infection that she'd got, the chest infection, and she caught COVID in hospital and passed away 4 days later. And it was very, very different this time in hospital with her, different from all the years that both my sister and I had spent with her. And I knew that the sparkle had gone from her eye, and she had no fight left in her. This point, I like to always touch on the word trauma. It gets me thinking about, what does trauma actually mean? And it is actually a Greek word that means wound. And at some point in our lives, that wound will require treatment. It just simply will not go away. And it also got me to think about depression. And of course, to depress is to hold something down. And what are we keeping under such pressure? Guilt, fear, love, hate, so many human emotions, but it often leads back to a trauma. So how did I get to be standing before you today? My mind was pondering, how can I continue to be productive and positive whilst managing my illness? And they say, play to your strengths, right? I've always had red hair and a big mouth, so the answer to me was obvious. And I Googled how to become a public speaker. And this rather crude method eventually introduced me to the world of speaker bureaus. And now, unbelievably, 4 of the largest speaker bureaus in the UK represent me. But of course, maintaining a positive mindset requires patience, understanding, and honesty. We have to accept the realization that we live life on life's terms. And this is a big one. We have to believe in ourselves. If you want somebody to take you seriously, and if you want to find confidence, you have to have that inner strength, and you have to believe in yourself. Recognize that you cannot influence everything, and you can control even less. Don't be afraid of failure, and from failure we learn and we grow. And perspective is our superpower. Perspective is something that I completely lost. We need to hang on to that. And it allows us to grip the side of the slide and focus on what we can actually control. Now, of course, my mind hits neutral once in a while, and this period of free fall invites doubt and vulnerability. But it's my self-belief that turns down that volume. Fortitude and resilience that my journey has instilled in me reminds me that I love and I am loved. Surrendering to our vulnerabilities is one of the most liberating things that we can do. It negates shame, and crucially, it keeps us one step ahead of our ego. So 3 useful tips that may provide some assistance along your own journey. An effective bridge between despair and contentment is a good night's sleep. Absolutely crucial. Music is a therapeutic time machine. It triggers memories, it allows your imagination to run wild, and it's magical. And of course, time is the most valuable currency of all, something that we don't get back, and sometimes that we really don't pay it the attention that it deserves. And this story so far is a vehicle that I choose to utilize in my pursuit to motivate and inspire others. And whilst I fully accept that I am a one-man drain on the NHS, this is sure to continue, but it definitely will not slow me down. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today.